So building off that film and building off what we heard this morning in the first panel, the next 30 to 40 minutes will be really emphasizing kind of the industry side of things. We'll be taking you through retail, health care, and mobility, and really thinking about how things have changed, whether it's tasks, skills, workflow, jobs. Leading this panel will be co-chair of the task force, David Mindell. No better expert to help moderate this, as he sits across both academia and industry, as he's the CEO of his own company, Humatics Corporation. And I'm really excited to kind of hear from him and hear from these panelists and welcome them to the stage. So thank you.
I'm on the end, so anywhere here is fine. So that was a great introduction for this the panel. One of the best things about MIT is its general lack of ivory tower separation from the world, and when we talk about these issues, as we have all morning, we talk about people who are out there working, out there seeing, out there doing things, as well as the researchers. So very happy today to introduce Itali Dayan, Executive Director of Strategy, Research, and Clinical Operations at Mass General and Brigham and Women's Hospital Center for Clinical Data Science, very much related to the Regina Barchelet story we saw up there, and clearly covering very interesting issues in AI and healthcare. David Johnson, who's Vice President of Production Engineering and New Model Quality for Nissan North America, which I think translates that David owns most, if not all, of Nissan's factories on this continent. And Dr. Zeynep Tan, who is a professor of practice at the MIT Sloan School of Management and an expert in retail and supply chain work, and author of the really quite revolutionary 2014 book, The Good Job Strategy. So welcome, Itali, David, and Zeynep. And I thought we'd just open with discussing technologies and in your areas of healthcare, manufacturing and mobility, and retail and supply chain. What are the technologies that are interesting? What are you seeing out there that's changing and affecting how work is getting done? Itali?
So maybe selfishly I would allude to artificial intelligence, which is one of the big technological advancements, or rather the application of AI to healthcare. I think we mentioned earlier in the discussion that in many fields and industries, the issue is about still implementing computerized systems and being able to actually aggregate data. I think in the healthcare system of 2019 and going into 2020, the issue isn't anymore the existence of data, but rather the explosion of data and the ability to make decisions and to reach the right conclusions based on that data. And one of the key ways of doing that is by applying AI.
David?
In the automotive industry, it's quite complex. I mean, you've got basically 30,000 individual components coming together to build a vehicle. So all the new technologies that we see today are going to have some level of impact either on the front line and the final manufacturing plant or out through the supply chain. But the two that I would say for me are having the most profound impact are the AI, big data analytics, machine learning, because that shapes how we see our current performance, and then also gives us the ability to predict our future performance and react on that well ahead of time versus when maybe bad things happen within the production environment. And the second one is virtual reality. Virtual reality probably hasn't been talked about much here today, but whenever we look at the production environment, most of the time we are making decisions on new product introductions whenever we see the physical new product. Virtual reality allows us to immerse in that new product development well ahead of time when it's only lines on screens. We can take the technicians on the front line, immerse them in an environment, and include them in developing the processes to build those new products, and also augment their training well ahead of time, which allows for a much more smooth rollout of new product.
Zeynep?
Okay, great. So I would like to take a slightly different perspective and talk about technology and people at the same time.
Please.
Because it's amazing how many leaders think about technology and people as separate things, but technology affects the work of people, the jobs of people. So in my world of retail, technology has always had a profound impact on retail, the work and people's lives. Yesterday, I had Jim Sinegal, who is the founder of Costco, in my class, and some of my students are here in this room. And his point was technology has always been a huge factor. Many years ago, when you would go to a checkout, Costco would only accept cash or checks because the credit cards were A, too expensive, the transaction fees were too high, and B, too slow. But over time, we've seen technology develop, and now they're much cheaper and also much faster, so that's what Costco uses. So there are lots of incremental changes like this that's happening in the retail world. But the one technology I think that's transforming is, and let me ask you in this room, how many of you have ordered something online during the last week? Yesterday? Exactly. So the biggest technology that's changing retail is e-commerce and everything that has to do with omnichannel. You can order something online, you can order something on your phone and expect delivery in your house within 2 hours. So that has been a transformational change. But most of the transactions in retail still happens inside the stores, almost 90% of transactions. And when you look at both the customer experience and the employee experience inside retail stores, that hasn't improved all that much. Customers still complain about the same problems: stockouts, merchandise not being on the shelves, long checkout, dirty stores, unhelpful employees. And when you look at the employee side, we have a huge problem in which retail is the largest employer in the United States, and it offers bad jobs with low wages, unpredictable schedules, and people really being used like widgets. One of the retail workers told me, we are throwaways who are a dime a dozen, just human robots. So I think there's tremendous opportunity to redesign the work and increase contribution of employees so that they can have higher wages and more contribution. But right now, we don't seem to be deploying technologies like that.
So maybe to start, follow up with you, Zeynep, on that. How do you see, or how should we be using technology to redesign work, transform tasks or jobs? We learned early this morning they're not exactly the same thing. And what are either examples or ways that can become successful?
So I can give you, I'll give you positive examples, and from companies that do this really well. The one thing that they do is there's a clear purpose of what the technology enables them to use. So one of the best users of technology I know in retail is a Spanish supermarket chain called Mercadona. And when they think about technology, they say, how can we use the technology to improve either the employee experience, employee productivity, contribution, or the customer experience? So many years ago, they decided to automate their warehouses, 100% automation. And the premise behind that was people were hurting their backs, the job was very standardized anyway, and they said, we don't want to ask a person to do what a machine can do. So when there's a clear benefit to either the customer or to productivity or to the employee experience, that's one good reason to use technology. But on the other side, when you look at some other companies, they're using what we at MIT now call so-so technologies, right? There's no clear benefit to either the customers or the employees or the productivity, but they just seem cheaper. And the drawback of that is now you're doing something that doesn't improve your operation all that much, but management's time is being used for that technology. So the one thing is, like, why are you using it? What's the purpose? The other thing that I see among companies that are really doing a fantastic job in deploying technologies is involving people in the design of these technologies. So technologies work great when they complement people and they enable them to create better value for their customers, do their jobs better. Why not involve employees in designing these processes? Why not involve employees in deploying these practices and rolling them out? So I think the involvement of people in both the design and scaling rollout is what I see as among the good companies.
David, you mentioned AI and virtual reality as some examples, or ML. How have you found what makes it successful at Nissan to roll these technologies out, either for the managerial level in the case of data analysis or for the frontline workers in the case of task design and analysis?
I'll give you an example on machine learning and how it's impacting the business from a productivity viewpoint, as well as the frontline workers. Within the Smyrna facility, which is a fairly large vehicle plant, about 650,000 vehicle a year capacity, we've deployed predictive maintenance analytics on 1,500 robots within the body shop. Now, these robots now stream all sorts of different performance metrics, torque, temperature, vibration, those type of things, to the cloud, which are then analyzed to predict when that machine may fail. Well, this gives us a huge benefit because we can go in and work on the robot on our own time versus on production time, and of course increase our overall productivity. And we used to have some level of predictive analytics that we did, but it was all done manually. We had 3 maintenance technicians that traveled around inside the shop. They would take grease samples, they would take measurements, and then we would do some rudimentary analytics and try to predict when we need to change out certain components on the automation. Well, now, those 3 people don't have to do that job. And that was a relatively low value added task when you look at the grand scheme of the operations. Now those 3 people have been redeployed, looking at new technologies that can be deployed in the manufacturing environment and help drive us forward. And I think what was said on so-so technologies, that's something that we've got to be very cognizant of whenever we look at the manufacturing environment, and not deploy technology for technology's sake. And involving all workers throughout the management chain, from the frontline employees to the executive staff, to ensure that we're pinpointing the right problem. When we look at technology first and then try to find a problem to solve with the technology, that's the wrong way to go about it. We need to find what the problem is, select the right technology, the right people that know the problem well and know the technology well, pair them together and use that synergy to drive forward with a proper solution.
Now, Itali, in healthcare, you have some special constraints, both around the human dimension of the work itself and also regulations and privacy and many other dimensions. How have you seen within the Partners Healthcare system AI-type technologies adapted or adopted or not?
So, AI in healthcare has many headwinds to it. First of all, if you compare it with the automotive industry or retail, all the legal frameworks that govern healthcare are built to slow down innovation and always prepare for a worst-case scenario. You'd rather have, from a legal standpoint, you'd rather have people receive less care than people receive more care, but some of that care be erroneous. The issue of that comes even more into play when you go into a hospital setting, which is typically a high-stress environment, in which healthcare providers, doctors, surgeons, nursing staff, etc., need to make decisions which are always under a shroud of mist. We don't actually know what's going to happen in many cases, and in fact, much of the biologic mechanisms that govern our health are not elucidated today. These things mean that the appetite for experimentation and the appetite for scaling out processes and actually moving them away from the human is fairly diminished across the system. The way that we deploy AI in our environment starts from, first of all, and I think you said it very well, and both of you, to be honest, talk with the people and identify the problems. The best solutions to date haven't been the most sophisticated AI algorithms or the products which seem as transformative throughout the entire US and beyond, but have been things that have been developed by researchers based in the institutes for very practical problems and deployed in a clinical setting in one service, and then maybe 2 services, maybe 3 services. Now, from a point of innovation, and especially in the terms of ROI and actually investing in innovation, that's a very challenging story to tell investors, right? Because you need to do a lot of homegrown solutions, and some will stick, and then some will scale, and some will evolve. And this is like very upstream R&D, like much of medical research in general, which on one hand and on both hands really makes the hospital into the ideal environment to develop these solutions from the people who would actually use that. We saw Dr. Constance Lehman and Dr. Regina Barzilai before that on the film here. Dr. Lehman is a breast radiologist, a women's health advocate. She's not an AI developer, and yet she collaborated with a PhD in computer science from MIT and developed a product which has a potential to change women's health screening in the US and beyond that. I think it's a great story. I think we're in a very early stage of that disruption, and I'm not sure if it's going to be a disruption as much as it could be in other fields, given the large level of heterogeneity and differences between cultural tendencies, medical practices, human anthropometrics, and human disease across different geographies and systems.
But even incremental changes can have a big impact. If we look at the world through the work that people do and through the problems and say, how do we solve these problems, rather than saying, how do I apply this technology in this environment, we could go a long ways in all of these industries, it seems like.
I absolutely agree with you. And I think the unique factor here is that in order to maintain AI, which will continue being performant, and maintain some robustness to change or adaptation to changes, it's an ongoing and very involved process. So indifferent from maybe in some places where you can say, I've really built a system that knows how to heal itself and knows how to grow, and I can deploy that, and hopefully I won't create a fascist chatbot, as we often hear about. And if it is, then you can, stop the bot, at least at this point in history. In healthcare, you'll need to continue being involved with the upkeep, understanding the results, and when we actually deploy AI solutions in the hospital, one of the key characteristics is that the way to monitor them and continue reviewing the results is often developed by the staff who actually does that, because every person would have his different dashboard, and one size will never fit all.
One of the things that someone told us when we started this task force on the work of the future about a year and a half ago was, everybody's going to focus on robots and AI, but it's really about the computers. And we were talking a little bit before we came on stage here about many applications where you have a simple iPad or a simple phone based, that all it does is present a document or a form in a place or in a way that's more convenient than a piece of paper at a desk. And you can say that's simple. You can also say that's 10 years ago technology, maybe the tablet is introduced, and it takes that long for these devices to really proliferate at scale. And I wonder if each of you may have some stories about just the slowness of proliferation, and at the same time, once it really happens, how widespread and profound it can become.
Yeah, I can give an example of a technology. I don't know why it took so long to do this. Actually, in this case, I think it was the CEO who had a bad customer experience, and that's why the company ended up fixing it. But since I gave a Costco example, I'll give a Sam's Club example, not to be to be neutral in the industry. So Sam's Club recently implemented this thing called Sam's Garage, and when you take your car to the warehouse club, you have your tire that needs to be changed. And previously, the frontline associate will get lots of information about you, about your car, and then figure out what tires would go with your car, but they would put in the information in one system. They had manuals, they had lots of documents to look to see what tires were actually fit with your car, and then another system to look at the prices. This whole process went anywhere from 30 minutes to 45 minutes just to figure out what tire fits your car, right? And they realized we can totally redesign this, use very simple technologies, computers, and put all those manuals together, and now that process takes 2.2 minutes. They had over 50% increase in the throughput time. They had an increase in their member satisfaction, and also increase in how associates feel about their jobs, because now their job is so much easier, but now they can be advocates for the customer, they can help them compare. Instead of wasting their time trying to figure out the different tires, they can see all these different options and talk about which one would work best and how they could pay for it, et cetera. So this is a great example of one that is solving a real problem, improving the experience of the associate as well as the customer, but it's a really simple technology. And again, we have an opportunity to look at the world through the lens of work and see how can we redesign it in a way that's a lot more efficient and better for everyone involved. So that's one example.
David, do you have examples from Nissan?
Yeah, I'll give an example of our frontline supervisors. Every automotive manufacturer has some level of production system. We have the Alliance Production Way within Nissan, which requires frontline supervisors to do certain audits in their particular zone on the manufacturing line. These were traditionally done as paper audits, and then they were transferred into a computer database once the paper audit was complete. And it tied up a tremendous amount of the supervisor's time. And a group of folks got together within our in-house APW group and says, you know, we can take iPads, tablets, and we can do all of this work on the tablet and have it seamlessly updated into the database. And it's going to free up the supervisor's time. So we got the group of the APW team together, along with the manufacturing systems team, which is an in-house IT team, if you will. And they worked together to develop the supervisor tablet system. This tablet system, although it's very simple, it's basically the same audit that was being done before, but the time that it saves is now given back to the supervisor to have more dialogue with the workers online, develop better relationships, look for solutions to either ergonomics or quality issues that may be happening. And you know, it's a simple technology that we use in our personal lives every day, but it had never been deployed into that environment because of the most dangerous words within manufacturing. We had always done it the other way. We'd always used the paper copy, so that's what we're going to continue to do. Well, innovative people got together and said, no, there's a better way. Let's change it. And you know, the pace of adoption was slow. We had pilots that would use and feedback, and now, you know, it's completely deployed within the manufacturing environment and paying great dividends.
Itali, do you have a favorite example within healthcare?
I think a revolution which is happening right now, but is yet to receive a lot of publicity, is the payer-provider interaction. Today, the way that payers try to control their risk and also to control utilization is a very labor-intensive process. It typically required, at least in many cases until recently, paper forms and filling out stuff and sending things in fax machines, etc. Most of that has been digitized and algorithmized to a small extent. But the next leap, which is happening right now, also with companies that spun out of large providers such as ourselves, is about applying AI and more machine learning methods into these interactions. And that could actually really move a needle in terms of the payer's cost base with some transfer of these savings to the provider side.
Mm-hmm. So how in each of these cases or in the industries that you work in, how are jobs changing, whether the high-level skill of the doctor or the retail worker, and how are organizations, if at all, responding to the need for different skills, maybe lower skills, different tasks? Do you have a good example or maybe a bad example of how it should work? Maybe starting with Zainab?
I don't have either good or bad examples. I will say that, I mean, in terms of number of jobs, we haven't seen much change in retail. 10 years ago, there were 4.4 million retail salespeople. Now there are 4.5 million retail salespeople. Same thing with cashiers. There could be some wholesale change, perhaps, in the cashier world if we have scan and go technologies. In terms of skills, you know, someone who used a computer now is going to use an iPad app. There's not much change in the skills that I see, at least from outside, but it could be very different in different industries.
Does the rise in the presence and the pressure of e-commerce change the way that the in-store retail workers
That has
need
changed,
to work?
and I think that is one of the reasons why we are still seeing some slight improvement in the number of jobs. So while some of the technologies have made things more efficient, the e-commerce means that now there's more work to be done inside the stores. So previously, we would go to the stores just to buy our merchandise. Now the store employees, they assemble our order for us, and we either pick it up at the store or we pick it up at the curbside. So technology has added more work to the retail store employees, and it has also increased the importance of competence in the operations and people side. So if you're relying on technology to pick up your orders, curbside delivery, or check inventory at the stores, you better make sure that those data are correct data from which you're promising customers of delivery. And many retailers tend to have tremendously inaccurate inventory data, point of sales data. So these technologies are, I think, increasing the importance of paying attention to your store processes, store operations, and also the competence of your employees. So if you operate with 100% turnover, it becomes very difficult to get all these things done because you're teaching somebody to do something, and then 2 months later, some other employee comes in, and these technologies are much harder to adapt with high turnover.
David, how does Nissan see skilling across the workforce?
It's a very interesting question because to understand the skills and the need for new skills within automotive, you got to understand automotive industry on the manufacturing side is largely defined by a lot of legacy systems. I mean, we have very large plants, huge capital assets that evolve over time, and that evolution usually takes place whenever new products are introduced. And with legacy systems and legacy processes also come legacy people, legacy ways of thinking. So it's how to bring the new skill sets and the new technology in without losing your best know-how, which is housed in your legacy employees. They're the ones that actually know how the business works and how to bring the manufacturing systems together to produce a final product. I'll give you an example of how we're doing it at Nissan. And since we're at MIT, I'm going to use an MIT student in the example. In the body shop, we have a vision for predictive quality. And in body, this is where all the metal components come together to build the foundation of the car. Very complex, and it requires a lot of technologies coming together to be able to predict the outcome of the quality. Well, one of the elements that we wanted to look at is fit and finish and surface quality. So we paired a 20-year veteran in the body shop with an MIT student. And we said, guys, we want to know how we can do this autonomously and feed the data into big data, do some analytics, and predict what the outcome is going to be. And I have a lot of meetings in my world, and the meeting that I look forward to the most was the meeting between these two individuals, because it was absolutely amazing. You had this 20-year Nissan veteran that didn't know anything about advanced vision and data analytics, that now talks like he invented this stuff. He is absolutely immersed in the technology. He understands it, and that understanding now gives him the ability through his 20 years of previous experience to look at other areas within the body shop and how to deploy. And then on the flip side, I've got this MIT student who had never been inside of a body shop before that is talking in detail how the body comes together, how the processes work, how the new technology fits into the process. So it's not just developing, the skill for a new employee coming in on the legacy, on how to do the legacy work of the company, but it's also those new employees teaching the veteran employees about new technologies. And only through that synergy, when you purposely pair these people with a common goal, can you really drive the skills forward where they need to be for mass new technology adoption and deployment.
That's a great example, because we hear a lot about companies who try to mix the foundational skills of older workers with the kind of data and technical skills of younger workers. And we actually have a cognitive scientist on our task force who's taught us that a lot of those skills just decline linearly over one's lifetime.
Right.
And but other skills, relational skills, social relationships, more foundational skills actually increase pretty linearly. Unfortunately, they tend to cross right about my age. So it's no wonder that they don't let me write code anymore. I wonder, Itali, if you see any of that kind of interaction in healthcare, or how the partner system deals with changes in skills, especially around information technologies across different types of providers and age groups.
Yeah, so first of all, in our case, I actually see a lot of interest from fairly senior and experienced physicians in AI and in new technologies. So I definitely say there's a lot of appetite for adoption. I think there's also a certain level of perhaps a narcissistic trait here, because a lot of the idea behind building AI products is to scale up cognitive processes. And if you believe that your cognitive processes are worth scaling up, you'd be interested in contributing to that product.
No one at MIT feels that way. I'm sure our students don't feel that way.
Yeah. There's also another piece. I'd say that we're now after the wave of medical informatics, in which we had a lot of kind of post-residency programs in which doctors actually learned how to operate computers, understand more basic stuff like ICD codes, basic data analytics tool. And now there's a huge interest now in the next wave of more advanced analytics as well as AI. We run a fellowship program at the Center for Clinical Data Science, of which I'm the executive director of. And we get hordes of candidates of post-residency, board-certified MD PhDs who want to stop everything for a year or 2 years and only learn about AI, develop AI products, contribute to publications in the field, etc. And I actually asked some of them, you as a neuroradiologist who could, in some cases maybe making north to $500,000 a year, what drives you to actually come back and do something which is similar to a postdoc? And many people would tell you, it's clear to me that the way that my job isn't at risk, and the field I work in is not at risk, but the way I conduct my affairs is going to change dramatically over the next few years. So I'd say that's definitely, an example of that.
Interesting. Such a wealth of experience on the panel here. I'm sure we're going to have a lot of questions. So maybe we don't have the questions yet on the monitor here, but we have a few emailed in here.
Yep, I'll read the first one. Technology always strives towards doing more with less, or enabling that could not have been possible before. So how should externalities be managed?
Big question.
Go ahead.
A little unclear how we think about externalities. Again, one of the things I always teach is that what you define as internal and what you find as external is a huge value judgment around how you draw the boundaries of the system. Maybe another question here.
It's Paul Barter from Toronto. I'm a management consultant and an author. Largely, we've had a conversation about what we would call competition within existing firms here. But we've got kind of two big elephants in the room in competition these days. We've got the global giants, the Google, Amazon, et cetera, that are entering many adjacent businesses. And we've got startups. So you have, in the case of Google, they're entering both automotive and healthcare. And we've got startups, Tesla and automotive, and a myriad of healthcare startups. Maybe speak about how you perceive competition from those, existential threats, if you would.
I'm happy to take the retail perspective. The big threat in the retail world is Amazon, which accounts for almost half of all the e-commerce sales. And I think for many companies, one of the issues have been that they focus too much on Amazon and not enough on their customers. So retail is still a big space. There's still a lot of opportunity to compete. Price and convenience are not the only thing that matter to customers. So I think the way to address that threat in at least my world of retail is to re-offer your customers a compelling reason to buy from you. And that compelling reason can't just be more products and more convenience. It has to be something else. And for that to be good, you have to invest in your store processes and you have to invest in your store employees so that customers have a fantastic experience.
Okay, hi everyone. My name is Anthony Tregoso. I am a pharmaceutical chemist and I work at Johnson & Johnson in Peru. So my question is for Itay. Maybe if we talk about sales, marketing, and other, we need to communicate at human level. But if we are talking about a treatment, a medical treatment, maybe we need a treatment at human level, but also at molecular level. So how are you using this AI to maybe know about the DNA of the patient and design a specific treatment for that patient? Thank you.
That's an excellent question, first of all. I'd say that one of the main limitations in implementing AI in healthcare, as I said earlier, is lack of understanding of biologic systems. And in that aspect, AI has a huge potential in order to make these connections and really converge different data sources, which is something that us as humans do a very poor job at usually. I'd say that in terms of, if you look at the hospital tumor board, that's always one of the most confusing meetings one could attend, because each specialty brings his own angle of view towards something, and based on their experience and based on their data sources. And you'd have a geneticist based on genomics, and you'd have the surgeon based on morphology, etc. And in that sense, there is a lot of work, including in our system, of how to fuse these data types together. The current generation was, you could use different neural nets, but eventually when you had to merge them together, the different data sources, you'd still go back to classic methods, and in that sense, you were limited to some extent. But the frontier of science and computational science is now progressing beyond that. I would assume that the area of big advancement in that field is still not at the hospital environment, but rather in pharmaceutical R&D. And I am looking forward to seeing more biosensors and more ways to efficiently capture endpoints and patient biomarkers in order to really implement these in clinical care, which today I find fairly limited.
I have a question from the online Slido, which has a lot of votes. What has been the reaction of the employees who see parts of their job being automated? And how do you communicate upskilling opportunities to your workforce?
I'll take that one, because I think I've probably got more in the automation side than the other two panelists. So most of the time, people are excited to see their job automated because we're automating jobs that are traditionally very difficult jobs to do. Maybe an ergonomically challenging job or have some other constraint that's around it. Now, as far as the redeployment of that workforce, there is all kinds of opportunities that are communicated within Nissan, and I'll take the engineering group as an example. Within engineering, we have a group of frontline technicians that we've brought online and work very closely with our engineers, as they know the production processes better than anyone. So they work with frontline technicians back with the engineers to go out and solve problems. So those are opportunities that we create as we automate jobs and repurpose people to a higher value use, similar to the example that I used with the maintenance technicians and the predictive analytics around robotics.
One more online and then one more for the audience.
Yep, absolutely. So there's a shortage of labor around technical skills in the US, like welding and nursing. So why do you think that students are not enrolling in vocational schools to fill those gaps?
Probably take that one as well. You know, I've made the comment locally within Tennessee, you know, a lot of it, I think, is a societal thing, because we say, go to school, get a 4-year degree, get a good job. And we don't talk about the vocational opportunities that are out there, that, you know, welders and pipe fitters and the skilled trades, you know, you can make a very good living doing those. And, you know, and it's one of the things that I'm proud to say in Tennessee that has a lot of push behind it, because those skilled trades are in short supply and they are very good paying jobs. And we have many initiatives to help support students that want to take that, that direction. But that's definitely something that as a country we have to continue to promote and celebrate whenever people make the decision to go and get a skilled trades vocational degree.
One more final question from the audience here.
Hi, Hugo here, fellow from MIT. Last month, publication from researchers at UC Berkeley, UC Chicago, and Partner Healthcare found that several artificial intelligence algorithms handling the healthcare of over 200 million people here in the US were infected with the same racism and racial bias that human decision makers have. So basically, the algorithms were denying critical medical interventions to black patients that were sicker than non-black patients. So the question that I have probably for Ty and David as well, so what you as a senior leader is actually specifically doing in order to identify and tackle the automation of discriminatory practices?
Oh, another excellent question. I'd say that each type of use case has a potential for different risks and different biases. The main two that I'm the most concerned about these days is diagnostics in terms of generalizability across different populations and being able to provide quality of care for a diverse set of, and equitable care for a diversified patient population. We are managing that by reaching out to additional data providers, I'd say, and identifying different strategies and technologies such as federated learning and ways in which you can improve the robustness of your product without actually jeopardizing the safety and privacy of the patient data. There's another aspect which is more hospital operations management, in which you could make optimization decisions that would be unequitable to different socioeconomic strata of society. In that aspect, I can say that part of it is about the thinking about how you minimize your cost function and which techniques and which data points you would do or wouldn't do, and where you'd maybe, you know, if to take from the computational sciences, you'd stay at the local minimum rather than the global minimum if it does in fact create inequality. And I'd also say that the positive, optimistic note on that is that all of our commercial sponsors who we are also involved in collaborating with in developing these solutions are actually extremely attentive to that issue and are actually interested in resolving that ahead of time and making sure that models can't be actually used to stray purposes. Some of it is because of reputational risk, and some of it is because I think the real understanding that we are in it in order to improve throughput in hospital operations, but also maintain a very high level of respect towards human dignity and cultural diversity.
Great answer to a very important question. And on that note, please join me in thanking our panel for a wonderful conversation.